True crime: how a mysterious Beaumont, Texas, murder was solved. The corpse at the Elegante Hotel stymied the Beaumont, Texas police. They could find no motive for the killing of popular oil and gas man Greg Flanagan, and no explanation for how he had received his strange internal injuries. Bent on tracking down his killer, Flanagan's widow Susie turned to private investigator Ken Brennan, the subject of a previous Vanity Fair story. Once again, as Mark Bowden reports, it was Brennan's sleuthing that cracked the case. Mark Bowden and Dan Winters. This is a computer-generated narration. Inconsistencies in pronunciation and tone may occur. Greg Flanagan traveled light and lived tidy. After so many years on the road, he would leave his rolling suitcase open on the floor of his hotel room and use it as a drawer. Dirty clothes went on the closet floor. Shirts he wanted to keep unwrinkled hung above. Toiletries were in the pockets of a cloth folding case that hooked onto a towel rack in the bathroom. At the end of the day, he would slide off his worn brown leather boots and line them up by the suitcase, drop his faded jeans to the floor, and put on lightweight cotton pajama bottoms. Most evenings, he never left the room. He would crank up the air conditioner — he liked a cool room at night — and sit on the bed, leaning back on two pillows propped against the headboard. Considerately, to avoid soiling the bedspread, he would lay out a clean white hand towel on which he placed his ashtray, cigarette pack, lighter, BlackBerry, the TV remote, and a candy bar. He smoked and broke off candy bits while watching TV. This is where Greg was on the evening of Wednesday, September 15, 2010, in room 348 of the MCM Elegante Hotel in Beaumont, Texas, lounging, smoking, snacking on a Reese's Crispy Crunchy bar, sipping root beer, and watching Iron Man 2. He missed the ending. Greg was accustomed to solitary nights. As a young man, he had worked as a chief engineer on ocean-going vessels, spending months at sea. In middle age, he had reinvented himself as a landman, a familiar occupation in South Texas, easing the exploitation of mineral rights on private property for gas and oil companies. Slender, with a close-cropped white beard and the weathered skin of a lifelong outdoorsman, he had partnered with his brother Michael in a thriving oil land leasing business based in this small city east of Houston. Every Monday morning, he would make the 2-hour drive in his pickup from Lafayette, Louisiana, heading west on Interstate 10 through scruffy Gulf Shore farmland, broken only by cell phone towers, oil derricks, and billboards advertising motel chains, bayou restaurants, quote, adult superstores, end quote, and other local attractions. It took him through the stink of the big ConocoPhillips refinery at Lake Charles, a forest of piping, giant tanks, and towering chimneys. The hotel was just off the Cloverleaf outside Beaumont. His company rented him a room in the, quote, cabana, end quote, a 3-story wing that wrapped around a small swimming pool framed by potted palms. That Wednesday night, watching his movie, Greg got an email from his wife, Susie, shortly after 7. Susie was using a computer program to file for a tax extension. After she reported her progress, he wrote back, quote, "You're doing good, babe," end quote. At some point during the loud computer-generated showdown at the end of the film, amid all the fake violence, Greg was struck from nowhere with a very real and shattering blow. A blow so violent it would blind a man with pain. He managed to get off the bed and move toward the door before he fell, legs splayed and face first. He was probably dead by the time his face hit the green rug. A, quote, natural causes thing, end quote. The following morning, Susie Flanagan called Greg's office. Husband and wife usually spoke every morning, but he hadn't called. He wasn't answering his phone. When he failed to turn up at the office, 2 of his coworkers drove over to the hotel and knocked on his door. There was no answer, so they got the hotel manager to open it. Their alarmed calls brought an ambulance and the Beaumont police. They found a middle-aged man dead on the rug, prone and doubled over, a spent cigarette cupped delicately between 2 stiff fingers of his left hand. Room 348 was stuffy and exceptionally warm. The man's skin color had gone grayish-blue. There was a wet spot at the crotch of his blue pajamas, but that wasn't unusual. Detective Scott Apple showed up a little more than an hour later. He is a short and very fit man with graying hair that he wears combed straight up in spikes. He is all cop. His wife had been a cop. He met her on the job. He was one of the assault team leaders on the department's SWAT team. He is one of those men who never stop working. But there was little here to interest him. No sign of a break-in or struggle, nothing disturbed in the room, no blood or obvious wounds. Flanagan's wallet was still in the back pocket of his jeans and had a stack of $100 bills in it, so robbery wasn't an issue. Those staying in nearby rooms had heard nothing. As Apple questioned the neighbors, he told them it was probably a, quote, natural causes thing, end quote. Sad. He poked around Flanagan's bags, looking mostly for pills, some clue to his collapse. There were none. Susie and Michael later told him that Greg never went to a doctor. He was a stubbornly independent man, suspicious of authority and unmoved by the modern passion for health and fitness. He did not exercise. He had chain-smoked his entire adult life and had the nagging cough to prove it. He neither drank nor ate to excess, but did both freely. It was easy to conclude that his choices had simply caught up with him. Susie was ready to believe it. She was shocked and grief-stricken, but she accepted that, for Greg, sudden death was a possibility. In fact, she took some solace in it. He had checked out on his own terms. Many times she had heard him remark, upon hearing of someone's dying suddenly, quote, lucky bastard, that's how I want to go, end quote. And so he had. At the hotel, the police saw the death as routine. A photographer snapped pictures to make a record of the scene, and the body was driven by a transport service to the Jefferson County Medical Examiner for an autopsy. The only mystery here appeared to be medical, and it was likely a minor mystery at that. Dr. Tommy Brown had a time-tested method. It took him 45 minutes to conduct a post-mortem exam, inspecting a body inside and out, measuring and weighing organs, all the while describing what he found and noting the metrics that fleshed out the official form. He was all business, crisp, efficient, and confident. Brown was thin and bald on top and had a spray of unruly white hair on the sides that gave off a mad scientist vibe. He did everything fast. He even talked fast. He was a local character, part of the legal landscape in Jefferson County, and a respected one. Where death was concerned, in this corner of Texas, Dr. Tommy Brown's word was law. The circumstances of Greg Flanagan's death, as reported, were unremarkable. On the table before him was a 55-year-old Caucasian male who appeared to be in decent shape. After methodical inspection, the only marks Brown found on the body were a 1-inch abrasion on his left cheek where his face had hit the rug, and curiously, a 1/2-inch laceration of his scrotum. This was interesting. The sac itself was swollen and discolored, and around the wound was a small amount of edema fluid. The bruising had spread up through the groin area and across the right hip. Something had hit him hard. The story his body told grew more intriguing. When Brown opened the front of the torso, he discovered a surprising amount of blood and extensive internal damage. A certain amount of partly digested food had been torn from his intestines. The doctor found small lacerations there, and on the stomach and liver, as well as 2 broken ribs and a hole in the right atrium of his heart. The condition of his insides reflected severe trauma. Flanagan had been beaten to death or crushed. Brown concluded that the wound to his genitals likely had been caused by a hard kick. He had also taken a blow to the chest so severe it had caused lethal damage. He would have bled out in less than 30 seconds. On the official form, next to, quote, manner of death, end quote, Brown wrote, quote, homicide, end quote. Who done it? When he got this surprising news, Detective Apple called Brown immediately for an explanation. The doctor told him that the man in 348 had suffered the kind of severe internal injuries he was more used to seeing in crash victims or in someone found under a heavy fallen object. There are not that many murders in Beaumont. Greg's was one of 10 that year, which was about average. Most are not mysterious. Detective work was usually a matter of doing the obvious, interviewing the drunk boyfriend with gunpowder on his hands, or finding the neighborhood drug dealer who was owed money. A case like this was a once-in-a-career event. If you enjoy working a stubborn whodunit, which Apple does, then this one was an exciting challenge. But the problem with the hard cases is that they are indeed hard. Over the next weeks and months, Apple chased down every angle he could imagine to explain the death of Greg Flanagan. But about 6 months into it, he was stuck.